Greetings. Welcome to this month's professional learning opportunity on questioning in social studies. I am Tiffany McCoy Thomas, the District Curriculum Content Supervisor for Social Studies. As you recall, nothing is impossible, and we want to thank each of you for being the right persons in the right seats, doing the very best job for all learners. While questions which elicit lower level thinking are an important part of teaching, they are useless unless they build toward questions which help kids develop higher order thinking skills. This quote is from Benjamin Bloom, and we are very familiar with the taxonomy levels that foster deeper levels of thinking that engage our learners. We want our classrooms to be the very fuel for learning. And to do so, they have to be safe places, safe to be able to answer the question incorrectly, safe to be able to question and wonder, and more importantly, for learners to know just how safe they are at all points in time in your classroom. Questioning is a highly effective strategy that engages learners and prompts their attention. The distribution of questions should be inclusive, but more importantly, they should be unpredictable. Our learners should know that we are here to foster inquiry and cultivate their curiosity for deeper levels. You can see from this small graphic that every state approved evaluation tool has a component that measures questioning. We know for our compass rubric, we're in 3B. So, as you begin to ponder exactly where all of this is going, why is it you might need to do this, we'll engage in just a little icebreaker. What kind of behaviors or thinking might each of these images represent? And I'm going to move this out of your way for just a moment so you can see exactly what we're looking at here. We've got this image, we've got this one, and we have this one. And I want to give you just a minute of wait time, perhaps stop and jot right here so you can think, what do you think the thinking for each of the creations in this image might represent, specifically in our classrooms? All right, let's take a deeper look. So we have the fly on the wall, busy bees, and wrestling with ideas. Did you come up with any of these? Do you have that learner that often feels like they're just sitting there holding space? They're unsure, they're not willing to come forward and participate. Perhaps you have those learners in your classrooms or buildings that they're just kind of in the mix of things that may not be structured. They're working, they're doing things, they're busy, but the productivity of it can sometimes seem uncertain. And then perhaps you have those learners who are wrestling with ideas. They're engaging in what we know to be productive struggle. So, questioning begins with and in the planning phases for instruction. It doesn't matter that you're in Unit 1, Lesson 1, that you're in Unit 6, Lesson 10. As you plan, this is where you begin to really think about unpacking the questioning. And just a side note here, you should be using the district's social studies lesson plans. And while a lot of this content is noted for you, it is still a best practice to take the plan, unpack it, dissect it, and really look at where the questions lie. What is the work for this week of instruction? The lesson plan is there for your use and integration, but at the same time, we do recognize and respect that there is still work you may need to do to perfect it for your learners. So when you're planning for questioning, we want to remind you to use clear protocols. Make certain that there is a range of depth of knowledge. Remember, you can use those lower level questions to elicit in participation and engagement, but the idea and the goal is for that level of questioning to build towards a DOK 4. We want to make sure that we're providing learners with ample wait time. Are we giving them the opportunity to do like those elephants, to wrestle with the content, to wrestle with the questions, to really think? Are we setting the climate in our classrooms for our learners to create their own questions, to ask us as their teachers, to ask each other, so that we can really see their learning on display? And certainly not a last element, but a critically important piece is to allow all students to ask and respond to questions. And with that asking and responding, we always want to make sure that we are also giving feedback, whether we are using the peer-to-peer, we're doing this in an accountable talk scenario. We want learners to get feedback on their responses. Do they get the answer? If the answer is incorrect, how are we as instructors, how are we as leaders, coaching instructors, to support the completion of that unfinished learning? How are we supporting learners in correcting their misconceptions? So as you plan, think about questions, think about going from lowest to highest levels, think about how you will include learners in this process, and more importantly, how you are going to create scenarios and situations where our learners are creating their own questions. This is just for your consideration. And of course, as you have access to this slide deck, you will be able to access the content that is hyperlinked here. But just some things for your consideration. Is your classroom open to dialogue? Do you use planned and emerging questions? Have you planned for questions? Are there scenarios where students can really get in and ask questions? Do you favor one over the other? And do you know why? It's important to know this because sometimes as we go through teaching, we can maybe prefer the planned question. And so as we are drilling down to make sure learners are mastering content, we may leave out opportunities for emerging questions. But if we think about this in the planning phase, we're much more likely to include both kinds. Do learner needs serve as an indicator of questioning? Do we know our learners? Do we know their strengths? Do we know the areas of proficiency in which they currently operate? Do we know what it is we need to do to drive them to the next levels of proficiency? And can we use questioning to do that? Are trick questions a dimension of questioning? Do you think perhaps giving learners a question that perhaps they're going to do a little bit more than struggle with because there really is not a solution? How will that benefit them being engaged in the process? What will be the outcome when they learn that there was really no solid solution? And how is that going to set them up for deeper levels of inquiry? What planning goes into the phasing of questions? Do you address questions to the group and to individuals? Are responses given to learner questions? Who's giving these answers? Remember, we want to make sure that we are giving opportunities for both peers to communicate with each other, that we are giving feedback, to the end that all questions are resolved by the time the lesson closes. How are questions differentiated to address diverse learning needs and styles? Who are our learners? What is it we need to do to support them individually and collectively? Are questions used at the end of a lesson to identify specific areas for additional learning opportunities? You'll see when you have opportunity to access this training deck that there is a question matrix tool that you can use, and you can take it by topic, and then you can assess it across the events, situation, choice, person, reason, and means. This is a really powerful tool for the social studies teacher to be able to access and consider the questions that will take place in his or her learning environment. For questions to be meaningful in social studies, for that inquiry to be fostered, and for learners to be engaged, we hold a shared set of beliefs. We know that good questions help our students learn. All students can respond to all questions. That think time is important, that all students think beyond rote memory. I hear often that our learners may not be able to access grade level content. And while this may be a fact, the truth is that they can reason and think, even if they are not able to yet decipher the text, they can think at levels that will allow them to engage. Divergent thinking is important, and it's not plausible for all questions to have one right answer, especially in social studies where we see on our state assessment, they are given multiple sources and they have to be able to make connections across time and event and people. And to do so, they have to cite evidence to support their position or their claim that they have taken. So there may not be a right answer between any two students. The approach is to get them to think deeply, to use the sources, to cite evidence as a means of validating the claim and or position that they have taken. What does quality questioning look like? Here are some teacher behaviors. Make sure your questions are clear and focused. Ask at all cognitive levels. You will hear me say this again and again. Allowing wait time after asking. So give students some time to think about that question. Allow wait time after student responses. Allow others in the classroom to really think on what their peer has said. What kind of feedback would they like? Again, this is an excellent opportunity to include accountable talk for your learners. Invite and allow time for student questions. Many times we might do something like, does anyone have any questions? However, if there aren't any questions, we may move on. It could be a scenario in which you have framed the learning for the day where you are giving students chunks or topics. Let's say we're looking at westward expansion and you want to break it up by 4 subtopics, and you want group number 1 to start thinking about questions as we go through this. You want group 2 to think about questions around this topic, and the same for 3 and 4, so that instead of asking anyone if they have any questions, now you can ask by group, what questions did your group come up with? What extended thinking could we engage in? So just using this as a sample format or any other that you would like, but put the student in the driver's seat to make those individuals responsible and accountable for their own learning simply by doing something like breaking the topic of the day into smaller chunks and having students, as we go through the learning of the day, to jot down questions they are going to present at the end of the day's lesson. Having that outcome leads to building that expectancy and also prepares learners to know what is going to be their next task in the middle of that lesson. What do we want our students to do when we're questioning? We want them to pay attention. So having, again, those subgroups ask questions, now we're hearing from our peers and now we're thinking deeply and meaningfully. We want them to use their wait time. Maybe it's a stop and jot situation, or maybe you want them to take a note of a response before they answer out. This is a great way to integrate not only using pen and paper, but to also integrate technology. Do you want it to be a collaborate board that allows them to respond? Nearpod allows us to do that. So do you want to ask an open-ended question where you want students to come up and give a response? It's also a great way to get students to move about your classroom. Maybe you're using chart paper or anchor charts and you're going to do a gallery walk of sorts, allowing learners to come around, see what questions and answers have been posed, and using something like a sticky note, giving feedback. It's another way to do accountable talk while letting students get up and move. And so now we've created some different energy in the classroom. Answer questions at appropriate cognitive levels. We want students to know when we have them in that recall situation, but we also want them to understand what it means to use strategic thinking or to extend their thinking. We want them to ask questions when they're curious. And most importantly, and a skill for life, as well as our class and state assessments, we want them to be able to make meanings and draw conclusions from the facts. As a result of understanding what teacher moves look like and what we want student moves to look like, here are some outcomes we can expect from questioning. Students are going to develop a better understanding based on facts, They're going to be able to use knowledge to problem solve and make decisions. They're going to make those connections across time and events and places. We also want them to hypothesize and speculate. So, what would have happened if we had not expanded into the West? What might our country look like today? Thoughtful answers for teacher and peer questions. We want students to really show up and be present in the learning. We want them to be engaged. So having them pose those questions is important for having them be able to give thoughtful answers. So that's why the stop and jot activity, turn and talk, as well as getting them to move and do a gallery walk can be really, really powerful to see what students are sharing and really measuring their learning outcomes based on the questions and answers they provide. And again, we want them to be the drivers of the learning. We want them to ask many, many high quality questions throughout the lesson, from the beginning to the end, not just stifled at any one section, not at the closing of the lesson when the bell is about to ring or if they're looking for clarity for their exit ticket, right? We want those questions to come throughout. That's where that engagement exists. That's where, as educators, we become the facilitators of learning and students during the heavy lifting, which means as a result, they are going to master our content. If we look here, we can see that questioning connects. It connects assessment, it connects instruction, it connects the standards. And I've noted that the National Council for the Teaching of Social Studies standards, as well as across any content, you would be able to see that questioning connects all three of these. And it allows us to ensure that the main elements of our practice, which are standards-based lessons throughout instruction that lead to high quality and proficient levels of assessment, are interdependent upon what we're doing in the classroom. And so questioning drives all three aspects of our work. Here we can see that characteristics of questioning, and I know that we know Bloom's and the revised Bloom's. I also know that we are familiar with the depths of knowledge. So I share with you a little bit from both, in that formulating questions trigger thinking. And I've shared, and again, you'll be able to access this as you have access to this training deck, and that's looking at Costa's 3 goals for education, which are the retention of knowledge, the understanding of knowledge, the active use of knowledge. And they combine and form generative knowledge. So we can see how to use both open-ended and closed questions. Which one do they occur at, lower or higher levels? We can also see, if you look here in the Costa's level of questioning, that at that first level, we're gathering. This is the same as recall. This is the same as being able to just answer the question. And we see these verbs. They can complete, they can identify, they can recite. In the second level of Costas, just as when we move towards strategic thinking, they're having to process, right? So if you're thinking and you want to compare this to a DOK, this is around DOK 3. They're processing. How do they compare? How do they explain? How do they analyze and distinguish? And then at that extended level of the DOK, we have Costas showing us at the top of the house here that how are they applying it? Because if learners cannot take the content, if they cannot engage in application, their ability to demonstrate proficiency and understanding will occur at lower levels. And what this can look like in our classroom is they answer the question. They may have even gotten the question correct, but being able to expound, being able to draw connections to prior learning, to make predictions about a next event, or to be able to see how 2 events are related can be slighted just simply because they got the question right, but they really haven't developed the robust kind of thinking that results from really putting them in a place where they can generate at a higher level. Again, just showing you and sharing with you that from all of the research, whether we're looking at Bloom's, whether we're looking at the DOK wheel, or even looking at Costas, we can see that 7 characteristics for essential questions derive. And we know that essential questions actually help us to drive learning. So as you look here, you'll see that these 7 factors are prevalent in all 3 of these research-based questioning models. So make sure questions are open-ended, that they provoke thought, that they call for a deeper level of analysis, that they point towards something transferable. Can they make those connections, not just across topics in social studies, but can they also see where this might point to a text that they're using in ELA or to a concept that is being explored in math or science? Make sure that they always raise additional questions. So a really good question should lead to additional questions. Remember the activity I referenced a few moments ago where I said break a topic into subtopics and have learners take note of questions they're going to then share out with the class? Question and answer should always lead to more questions and answers. Make sure that they are getting the support that they need. And let's go over this again and again. Are we seeing a question that students may have struggled with presented in a different way in another lesson? Is it resurfacing in bail work? Is it resurfacing in our exit tickets? Because we really want them to make those connections over time. So as you look here in social studies, we're going to just briefly look at depth of knowledge for social studies. So a recall level question might involve using list 3 branches of government. Explain, and then let's take it a little bit deeper. Explain why the founders created the 3 branches of government. So this is that very basic level of recall. Do they know what they are? Can they answer them quickly? But if we move to skill and concept, we're now wanting them to be able to contrast the people, identify the patterns, summarize the events. So what events in history led to the establishment of 3 branches of government? Describe how these 3 branches of government ensure a democratic process in today's world. We want students to be asking us the why. The DOK3 represents extended thinking, and of course, DOK4, strategic thinking. We have access in our website, anchor charts, and we have these for your use in the classroom. You can take them and print them out for student use so that students can not only see what they're doing at a strategic level, but they can see keywords, and this can help you if you're sending it home for homework. Maybe it's in a tabletop formation for them to be able to use, which would be excellent. But again, when we get to extended and strategic thinking, we see students using similarities to solve problems, differences to solve problems. They can make connections across time to show a bigger picture. Can we reach back to the past, look at a current event today, and help our learners draw a through line to see how these things are connected? Most often, social studies can appear to be less engaging because the element of relevance is missing. But here in the DOK4, here in the strategic thinking of DOK, the extended thinking of DOK3 and the strategic thinking of DOK4, this is where students really have the opportunity to draw those connections. Or if we're going back to Costas or even back to Bloom's, they're at the highest points of higher order thinking, deeply engrossing learners in the need to apply, to justify, to develop, all of these things. And in our lessons, we have to ask, what did learners develop today? What did learners create today? So again, just drawing from social studies, let's look at 3rd grade social studies and then a U.S. history class. So we know 3rd grade, we're looking over at Louisiana, culture, and groups. Can students analyze the study and study the impact of various cultural groups in Louisiana? A lower level question would be for them to identify cultural groups. A more strategic question or an extended thinking would ask them to create an image representing the influence, not the culture, but the influence of the culture. So as a result of Native American presence or as a result of Spanish influence, what would be an image they would create? This really helps us to see, have the connections been met? In U.S. history, students can analyze and study the reasons of the American Revolution, but now can they debate? Could they create a treaty of their own that would include elements they might feel the treaty that is the result from the American Revolution left out? Can they debate as to what events led to the revolution that were a direct correlate of the outcomes? We have to create the environment, and I go back to opening with you in this session about that safe classroom, because it can't be that's wrong, you can't rewrite history. Why can't they rewrite history if it is helping them to lead to a deeper understanding of history? No, we're not asking students to come up with something that is not truthful, but what we are fostering is a deeper understanding that if we leave out one aspect, what would be the result? And what happens is we generate more, better, more meaningful, deeper level questions. And now, as the instructor, when we come back to finish the learning, we can clarify misconceptions, ensure that the right end goals have been mastered. You may think that questioning only comes about in our classrooms, but I just want to share this with you for thought. Forbes actually published this in December of 2020. And it says questioning has a rich and distinguished tradition in education. It goes all the way back at least to the Socratic questioning method developed in ancient Greece. This disciplined practice of thoughtful questioning enables students to explore complex ideas. In the process, they uncovered their implicit assumptions, exposed deeply held beliefs, and recognized hidden contradictions. Rather than the teacher filling the mind of the student, both are responsible for moving the dialogue forward. So, as I reflected just a moment ago about allowing them to rewrite history, not for the purposes of demonstrating proficiency, but for the purposes of revealing their assumptions, exposing their beliefs, and helping them to see contradictions they may hold as a result of what they've come up with. So now, as the teacher, when you again go to finish the unfinished learning, you're moving the dialogue forward, but you've also put your learner in the mode of being responsible and accountable in the dialogue that goes forward. Questions students can ask themselves before, during, and after teaching. These become really important. And again, this content will be yours to have. Just want to make sure everyone can see, and I have to move slides, so I apologize. What can they ask before teaching? What's the topic? What am I supposed to learn? During teaching, can they ask you about what's confusing them? Can they ask about what's complex? Can they ask why? After teaching, students should be able to ask and answer, what should I do with what I've learned? How do I know that I know? So just implement some of these before, during, and after teaching questions. We understand that getting learners to participate can be heavy sometimes, and we don't want to leave you not understanding how you can foster what it is you want them to do. So, for the purposes of instructing, if the skill is to have them elaborate on a classmate's idea, here's STEMs that you can use. Understand that the Louisiana Department of Education provides the scope and sequence for K-12 social studies. Within the context of each grade level's scope and sequence document, there are STEMs for discussions, for questions. These links have also been provided in your pacing guides. And as we are writing lesson plans, we are also connecting this. Draw from these things. You do not have to reinvent the wheel. Actively seek to include classmates who are not participating. How do you get students to include other students? Call your classmates' name and ask them, I'm wondering what you're thinking about this, or team them together and show them how they can use this. This becomes very powerful. And again, you don't have to come up with the tools to help you scaffold student development. We are here and to support you. We're providing this so that you can use it. Maybe you want to annotate it for a lesson. By all means, it will be available in the teacher toolbox on the social studies site. How do you rebuttal and not be defensive? We want learners to be able to engage in debate, but debate around the facts, not allowing themselves to become personally charged and responding out of that, but being able to rebuttal in a way that is commensurate with effective debate. How do we help students build the skill to remain open to ideas? Again, here are stems that you can use. I hadn't thought of that way, but I wonder. So we often say accountable talk, but what we're really doing is scaffolding student development of collaborative skills. And these tables allow you to do that. This second table not only shows you the skill, it also helps you to know when to use it and what the stem will be. Again, if I want the skill to be surfaces and questions on assumptions, so I want students to really think on what it is they are wanting to provide for an answer. If I really want them to dig a little deeper inwardly, when would I use this? To get them to genuinely wonder whether or not a personal belief is affecting their perspective. Again, citing evidence. And if we are taking AP and dual enrollment courses, oftentimes it's more than citing evidence. It's actually having to argue. So, what STEM would we use? Am I willing to listen to these facts even though they are contradictory to my own beliefs? So again, these are prompts and skills, STEMs to scaffold student development of question asking skills. Another tool available for you to put into place as you are annotating for your learning for this particular lesson. So this would be something that you could take with the lesson plan that exists and say, okay, knowing my students, I know my students. So this is the skill I know that they really need to focus on because I've seen when they're confused around terminology or sentences. So this is what I want to be able to ask. More important than anything in the social studies classroom is your willingness to be high energy. If you're not enthusiastic about the material, students may not be. So here we're sharing with you how you can exhibit high energy for student engagement movement. Remember, I said more than accountable talk to turn and talk, but to maybe place some anchor charts around the room and let students use Post-its to go and put up their responses. And then in a reverse move, let them go around and give feedback to peers. Let them get up and move. I often say that the mind can only absorb what the seat can endure. So let your learners get up and be able to move across the classroom to really be engaged. When you're reading text, become the characters. Teach them how to become the characters. Inquiry. If you've not already taken a look at inquiry as it is on our site, know that the two biggest elements directly impacting the social studies classroom are the compelling and staging questions. We want to foster and scaffold curiosity. So we want students to understand the big compelling questions, and then we want to be able to turn and take those questions and use them to stage their learning for the day. So how do we do this? Compelling questions reflect the interests of students and the curriculum and the content with which students might have little experience. So example was the American Revolution revolutionary. That's a compelling question. I didn't ask them what the American Revolution was. I did not ask them when it took place. I asked them whether or not it was indeed a revolutionary act. So now we got to start looking at revolutionary acts. Are there some things we could draw from current events to help debate around this or to structure the thinking for this question? Absolutely. In a similar manner, the staging questions literally have activities that introduce students to the ideas behind the compelling question. It really generates their curious nature for the topic or just wanting to know a why. So an example of a staging question for the compelling question about whether or not the American Revolution was revolutionary is for students to discuss the question of how much change must occur for something to be considered revolutionary. This really digs at that because if I don't know what it means to be revolutionary, if I don't know, could it be one event? Does it have to be things that occur over years and years? And we see this throughout history, ladies and gentlemen. So how is it that we help them understand what revolutionary means? So take some time, look at the arc of inquiry as it lives in the website, and know that this is really what is going to help generate that engaged questioning with your learners in the classroom. Now, of course, this would not be professional learning if we did not have an ask of you, right? And no, there isn't going to be a test. That's the good part. But what there will be is an opportunity in your PLCs, in your grade level meetings, in your department meetings to say, okay, we looked at this learning. What does this mean? I call this stamping your learning. Let's see if we understand and know what we know. So these are 4 things that you could do. Generate a list of questions that both scaffold and foster collaboration. Of course, you can look back at those stems. Use the content from this session to develop a compelling question that you're going to use for a quick write, or maybe that you're going to use midpoint to check. Use the inquiry model to develop 2 activities with the same focus, but scaffold your questions for diverse learning. And then finally, a 4th way to stamp your learning here is you have a topic that is not engaging learners. Using questioning, how can you shift the lesson to one that would foster more compelling engagement, if you will? So just spending some time with this, stamp your learning, show what you know, right? Lastly, we are here to serve and support you. I am, again, Tiffany McCoy Thomas, the Social Studies Content Supervisor. Miss Augusta Caesar is a content trainer, and so is Miss Jennifer Foster. We have provided a feedback form for you because, again, we're here to help. And our job is to support you every day. Should you have further questions, further concerns on this topic or any other, by all means, email us or visit our social studies site at bit.ly/lowercase ssebr. There is a support request form. There's also a way to access us for live virtual office hours on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of every week from 3 to 4 o'clock. It is our pleasure to serve. And remember, nothing is impossible because in social studies, you were born to make history.